LaJoy and Allgaier are in the Daytona 500, and why is NASCAR throwing a caution with less than a second to go before the leaders take the checkered flag? Let's break down the 2025 duels at Daytona. Hello everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and let's break down the duels at Daytona. It was a wild night in Daytona Beach with these duel races. They've been crazy the last couple of years, and they were really crazy tonight. We'll talk about Allgaier and Corey LaJoy making it into the Daytona 500. We'll talk about the winners, Bubba Wallace and Austin Cindric, and then we'll explain a little bit about why NASCAR threw a caution with a few feet, it felt like, from the start-finish line to finish the race. Let's break that down. Before we get into each individual duel race, I want to break down the open cars, right? Let's take a quick look at it. So we have Corey LaJoy raced his way in tonight. He's in the Daytona 500. Justin Allgaier in the Daytona 500 raced his way in tonight. He will start the Great American Race. Martin Truex Jr. made it in last night on single car laps. So did Jimmie Johnson. He made it in last night. Now, Helio Castroneves did not make it in the race, but he does receive, he was the only driver on this list that could receive it, the OEP, which means he will start as a 41st entry in the Daytona 500, and he cannot receive any of the purse money. That will not be allowed for him. He's basically kind of like an extra spot. So he doesn't take up a spot on the grid. He doesn't get to pick a pit box. He has to start in the 41st position. He can race, he can finish, but he cannot receive any prize money from the purse. So that's certainly something that we'll keep note of going into the 500. Let's break down each duel into two parts, right? We have two duels. Let's talk about duel number one first, and there's a lot to get into. That was a fairly entertaining race. There was a lot of drama at the beginning of the race. We had four cautions. We had at the beginning, we had the 38 car, the Front Row Motorsports car of Zane Smith go up, hit the wall, looks like a flat tire, very strange situation. Don't know if he run something over, didn't have enough tire pressure in there. We'll have to look and see what happened before we go into the 500. Don't want to have that issue. Could have caused some damage to the car. That was caution number one on lap 3, I believe. And then, not long after that, I believe it was lap 14, we have our big crash of the race, right? And you see Chandler Smith, one of the open cars, racing to get into the Daytona 500, just makes a mistake, just straight turns left into Justin Haley, causing a head-on collision. That was a heavy hit for a couple of drivers in this crash. Glad everybody was okay, but that's certainly unfortunate. I hate watching the duels and seeing wreck race car. And I'm all for entertainment in NASCAR. The big one at Daytona, that's a part of the Daytona 500. You almost want to see the big crash at Daytona and the Daytona 500. It's an entertaining aspect of the race, but I hate seeing it before you even start the race. That always has been aggravating to me. But it did happen tonight. They were racing hard, risk versus reward, and it did cost Chandler Smith in the number 66 car a spot in the Daytona 500. Also, Helio Castroneves was involved in this crash as well. Not really sure what was going on there in the next turn when he lost control of the car under caution, slid back up and hit the outside wall. That didn't look too great, at least on TV from what the fans saw watching the broadcast coverage. So once again, Justin Allgaier was able to make it into the Daytona 500 on this open race. Let's take a quick look at the top 10 of this race. Once again, we'll look at the finish. Bubba Wallace crosses the line 3 wide behind him. That was incredible racing behind him, but once those cars got stalled out behind him, racing 3 wide, a couple tried to get a run but couldn't quite do it. Bubba Wallace secured the win. That's something interesting to note going into the Sunday's 500. But Bubba Wallace, a nice win for him. He's been good at Daytona in the past. Finished second there in the 2018 Daytona 500. Finished second as well in the 2022 Daytona 500. He's had some success as far as results go in the Daytona 500, but he has not won a Daytona 500 or the Daytona Summer Race. So he did win tonight, which was certainly exciting for him and that new baby that he's got. So certainly exciting for Bubba Wallace. We'll see what he can do. The car looked good all day. The Toyotas look good this year at Daytona, and a lot of them will be starting up front. Once again, you have Chase Briscoe once again starting at the front. You have now Bubba Wallace starting in the 3rd position behind Cindric. You had William Byron finish. It looked like he had a fairly fast car as well. Ty Dillon actually showing a lot of speed this whole weekend. This wasn't a fluke. He showed speed yesterday in qualifying on Wednesday night, showed speed today in the dual race. You have Ross Chastain 4th, Tyler Reddick showing some speed, another one of those Toyotas 5th. AJ Allmendinger, he's had some results at Daytona. I believe he's finished. Has he finished in the top 10 at Daytona the last 4 years, I believe AJ Allmendinger has. So he's been getting the results in the Daytona 500 too. Austin Dillon, Chase Elliott, Justin Allgaier with that ninth place finish put him in, and then Kyle Busch finishing in the 10th position, had a solid race as well. Things looked to be clean on that team on pit road, which was in contrast to really the whole season last year. Once again, those top 10 will receive points, almost like a stage point. They'll receive regular season points. Wallace would get 10, Kyle Busch would get 1, and then you obviously just fill in between. So that's certainly interesting. Let's go into duel number 2, right? There's a lot of interesting things to talk about in duel number 2 as well, which we need to break down. Let's start out with the lap 48 crash, right? We had the first 48 laps. It was all fuel savings. It was all strategy, trying to gain position on pit road. What they're trying to do is save enough fuel so when you do pit, you have a shorter pit stop. You want to fill up as least amount of fuel as you can to make it to the end of the race. You're going to see that in the Daytona 500 as well, most likely. You had a couple of guys try to stir that up by not saving fuel, but it just didn't quite work. That's certainly a new aspect to Daytona, Talladega type racing, which is, I don't think it's fantastic, but it certainly adds an element of interest to each race. Instead of going 195, you're going about 170 and half throttle, which is really interesting. And that's what we saw in the opening stages of this duel race until lap 48. Chris Buescher pulls a block on Austin Cindric. That was a bold move to hold the lead on another Ford driver, but it just got everything so squirrely. You eventually see a crash, taking out a few guys, Alex Bowman, a couple other drivers involved in this crash at closer to the end of the duel race. I'm sure there's some frustration there with the drivers involved in that accident. Which was certainly frustrating. Let's talk about the finish of this race. Coming to the checkered flag, NASCAR throws a caution for the crash on the front straightaway with what I believe it was less than a second until the checkered flag waves. We thought Eric Jones won the race. I knew it was close because we saw Fox did a great job showing the caution lights on the bottom of the screen. I knew the caution came out before. I didn't know who had the lead at the moment of caution. NASCAR went back and looked. NASCAR actually posted a photo of the exact moment of caution. They do this. They did this last year in the Daytona 500 as well. Another close finish, but this one's more frustrating for me. Last year I got it because you had two cars wrecking. You can't go back through there with cars, debris all over the front straightaway coming to the checker, right? You just can't do that. This one to me is frustrating because I don't understand just why. Why would you throw a caution a second before the leaders cross the line? There has to be some situational awareness. It just in my opinion, I need a better explanation than what I was given. Fox tried to, it seemed, cover up for him. Kevin Harvick gave the reasoning that you don't want cars continuing to try to finish the race with wrecked cars, and that totally makes sense, but you're talking about less than a second or maybe a second away from getting to the checkered flag. If this was the Daytona 500, that's exceptionally frustrating for the 10 million, 12 million people watching the finish. I think that needs to be addressed in meetings, and you cannot have that same issue. I don't like that at all, to throw a caution literally in the blink of an eye before the checkered flags waving on the leaders. You wait till after to throw the caution. That's what I think we should have seen tonight. There has to be some sort of situational awareness there. That to me doesn't make any sense. Why you would go back in what was going to be a classic finish at Daytona, the first time the 43s won at Daytona and legitimately won at Daytona in the duel races since the 1970s with Richard Petty. All that would have been great, but instead you give it to Austin Cindric, who just didn't lead to the line. He led at the moment NASCAR hit a caution button. It's just more frustrating to me, and I think it needs to be addressed before you go into the 500. If we have a Daytona 500 in like that this year or any other year, that's just a bad look, and that's going to be a lot of frustration from a lot of people watching, people that don't watch NASCAR every week, people that do watch NASCAR every week. That's NASCAR's big event. You just can't have that issue, and it's very possible with the type of racing we have now at Daytona. Have to address that. Let's go through the top 10 in the second duel race. Once again, this sets the lineup. So Austin Cindric, good weekend for him, wins the duel race. Once again, per rule, he won the duel race, so I can't talk about that. I'm talking about let's fix this before we go into Sunday, which I would think you'd already have that situational awareness. I'm going to need a better explanation for why they threw that caution. That's all I'm saying. But Austin Cindric does get the win. That puts Eric Jones in second in tonight's duel race. Now, when we go through the rest of the results, I do want to mention they haven't officially, at the time I'm filming this, have not been officially posted yet, so they could change a little bit while NASCAR is looking through video feed, but I'll show on the video the correct standings, but I might say the wrong ones. Chris Buescher, third. Denny Hamlin had a pretty strong run. Once again, recovered from that penalty, ended up finishing in the fourth position. Joey Logano finishing in the fifth position. He looked to have a really strong car as well, which is important to keep note of. Corey LaJoie in the sixth position punches his ticket into the Daytona 500. LaJoie's had some success at these type of racetracks, had some good finishes, has run very well at Atlanta. I'd like to see if he tried to make that Atlanta race because he has almost won at that race or been in position to win at Atlanta, which is a similar style track now. Want to keep an eye on Corley Joy on Sunday. Todd Gilliland, Ryan Blaney, John Hunter Nemechek, another one of those with the penalty, and then Christopher Bell to round out the top 10. Once again, those top 10 do receive points, which is certainly an important aspect to this race. And I don't believe we have, we didn't have a single Hendrick car in this duel finish in the top 10. We had Elliott and Byron finish in the top 10 in the last duel. But that's really all there is to break down. There was a lot to get to following these duel races. Once again, 4 drivers filling the rest of the field. That open provisional as a 41st spot for Helio Castroneves is really exciting for him. I'm looking forward to it. Daytona 500, the weather right now does not look great going into Sunday. It looks like there could be some thunderstorms and showers throughout the day. The nighttime and later evening looks a little better on the current forecast. It's Central Florida. That's subject to change a lot before we actually get to the 500. 3:11 Eastern time on Sunday. Should be exciting. We have 2 practice sessions, one tomorrow evening and another one on Saturday evening, so we'll keep an eye on that as well for NASCAR's Daytona week. That's it. All there is to talk about following the duels, and of course about Kyle Busch getting 1 point on the day, finishing 10th in his duel race. Let's get rowdy.